There are things I still can't explain about what happened last year. The letters that arrived with no postmark, the messages sent from a phone number belonging to someone already gone, the knock at my door at exactly 11:14 at night, and the woman standing on the porch who smiled at me before pointing at something in the dark behind her, something I couldn't quite see. I still don't know what she was warning me about, and I'm not sure I want to. This started the way most strange things do, quietly, without any warning at all. About a year ago, I developed a serious health condition that forced my husband and me to temporarily move into my parents' house while I recovered. We didn't announce it. We didn't post about it. We were still in the same town, and honestly, I wasn't interested in anyone's sympathy. So we kept it small. Only immediate family knew where I was staying. That's what made the letter so impossible to explain. One Monday morning, my mother came upstairs holding an envelope, and the look on her face told me something was already wrong before she said a single word. The letter was addressed to me, but not with my married name. It used my maiden name, a name I hadn't gone by in over 10 years. And that wasn't even the strangest part. My parents had only lived in that house for 2 years. I had never used my maiden name at that address. There was no logical way for anyone to connect that name to that house. The return address belonged to a woman named Patty C. I had no idea who she was. I opened it anyway. Inside was a handwritten letter on ruled notebook paper, and what I read stopped me completely. She knew about my illness. Not in a vague, general way. She described specific symptoms. She referenced fears I had only admitted to myself in the dark, alone, in the middle of the night. At one point she wrote, and I'm going to read this exactly as it appeared. I know you're afraid to sleep because you think you won't wake up again, but you're stronger than you realize. I had never said that to anyone, not even my husband. The letter felt like it had been written by someone who had known me my entire life, someone who had been sitting beside me through all of it. At the bottom she signed it simply, "Love always, Patty," and beneath her name was a postscript, "You can call me anytime," with a phone number written underneath. My mother and I spent nearly an hour trying to figure out who this woman was, and eventually I did what anyone would do. I called. A woman picked up. I asked for Patty C. There was a long pause on the other end, and then a quiet sigh. My mother passed away a year and a half ago. My stomach dropped. I started apologizing, started fumbling toward hanging up, when she stopped me. "Wait." Her voice had shifted. "Why are you calling my mother's phone?" I told her about the letter, about the number written at the bottom. She was quiet for a moment, and then said that she had inherited the phone account 6 months ago, that the number had transferred to her after her mother died. I ended the call and just sat there. That's when I looked down at the letter again, and that's when everything changed. There was a sentence in that letter that had not been there before. I was certain of it. I had read every word, and this line, "I was watching when you opened this," was not there when I first read it. The handwriting matched perfectly throughout the entire page, but those words were new. My mother read it after me and went pale. Neither of us spoke for a long time. 3 days later, a second letter arrived. No stamp, no postmark, no return address. It was just sitting inside the mailbox, like it had always been there. Same handwriting, same notebook paper. This one mentioned Patty's daughter by name, called her Kim, said she worried too much and had always been afraid of things she didn't understand. And at the very bottom, one final line, "I hope your breathing is better tonight." Earlier that same evening, I had suffered a severe breathing episode. I hadn't told my husband. I hadn't told my parents. I hadn't told anyone, because I didn't want them to panic. Nobody knew. Nobody. The third letter arrived a week after that. Again, no stamp, no postmark, just one sentence inside. "You looked beautiful in the blue sweater yesterday." I had worn a blue sweater the day before, while sitting alone in my parents' backyard in a spot completely hidden from the street and from every neighboring yard. There was no angle from which anyone could have seen me. I burned that letter in the backyard that same night. Then a month later, at 3:07 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 6 words, "Please stop throwing my letters away." I sat completely still, for I don't know how long, because I had told no one about burning that letter. Not my husband, not my parents, no one on this earth knew I had done that. A second message came through a few minutes later. I miss talking to you. And then a photograph. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. It was my parents' house, taken from outside my bedroom window, and the timestamp showed it had been taken 5 minutes before the message arrived. The police searched the property that night and found nothing, no footprints, no tire tracks, no sign that anyone had been there at all. After that, everything went quiet. For almost 6 months, nothing, no letters, no messages, no photographs. I started to convince myself it had been some elaborate, cruel joke, that someone had found a way to explain all of it, and I just hadn't figured out how yet. And then last week, another envelope appeared. No stamp, no return address. The handwriting inside was shakier than before, like whoever was writing it was running out of time. There was only one sentence on the page: "I don't have much time left before they find me." And underneath it, a second line: "Please don't answer the door tonight." At exactly 11:14 p.m., someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman standing on my porch, elderly, grey hair, smiling at the door like she had been expected. I had never seen her face before in my life, and yet I knew immediately, in some way I cannot explain, exactly who she was. She raised one pale finger slowly to her lips. Then she turned and pointed toward the end of the driveway, toward the darkness beyond the reach of the porch light. Something was there, something tall, something completely still, just watching. The porch light flickered once. When it came back on, she was gone. The driveway was empty, no car, no footprints, nothing. The next morning I found one final envelope wedged under the front door. Inside was a photograph taken in my bedroom while I was asleep, and written across the back of it in that same shaky handwriting were 4 words: "I couldn't protect you. I still have every letter. I've thought about throwing them away, burning them the way I burned that third one, but something stops me every time, some feeling I can't quite name. Like as long as I hold on to them, the thing at the end of that driveway has no reason to come any closer. I don't know what Patty was. I don't know what she was warning me about. I don't know what was standing in that dark at the end of the driveway, or whether it's still out there somewhere, watching. What I do know is this: she tried to protect me, and whatever she was protecting me from is still there." Something was living on our property. Not in the house, on the land itself. We didn't know that when we moved in. We found out the hard way the night I mowed over 4 graves that had been hidden in the grass for over 100 years. After that, nothing was ever quiet again. My name is Jake. I was 16 when my family moved to a small town in rural Tennessee. My parents thought it would be a fresh start, a quiet ranch house, wide open land, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. They were wrong. Our house sat on a ridge overlooking a slow, dark river. The property was beautiful in an old kind of way, the kind of beautiful that makes you uneasy without knowing why. We moved in during late summer, and for the first few weeks, everything was fine, completely normal. But a few weeks in, something changed. I was out on my dad's tractor one afternoon, mowing the back hillside. Wide blade, steep slope, nothing unusual, until the machine lurched so hard I nearly got thrown from the seat. I killed the engine and turned around to see what I'd hit. I stood there for a long moment, just staring. The path I'd cut up the hill looked like a scar through the grass, and in the middle of that scar were 4 rectangular shapes I hadn't seen before, flat stones, old ones, each about the size of a grave marker, because that's exactly what they were, 4 graves, hidden under decades of overgrown grass, right on our property, right behind our house. My parents called historians, brought in archaeologists. Nobody could say for certain who was buried there, but the consensus was that these graves were extremely old. Some believed they may have been connected to the Trail of Tears. Others weren't sure. And honestly, the not knowing made it worse. We should have left them alone. The knocking started a few days later. 3 impacts from outside against the brick wall of the house. Bam, bam, bam. My dad went outside with a flashlight. Nothing. No footprints. No animals. Nothing. The next night it came back. And the night after that. And the night after that. It wasn't random. It wasn't the wind settling the frame or a tree brushing a window. It was deliberate. The sound traveled slowly around the perimeter of the house, like something was circling it, like something was announcing itself. That's when the sleep stopped, for all of us. Then came the night with my dog. Her name was Biscuit, golden retriever. The kind of dog who'd bark at her own shadow if she thought it was threatening something she loved. She wasn't scared of anything. Coyotes, strangers, thunderstorms, none of it fazed her. I remember I opened the back door to let her out, like I did every night. The second the door cracked open, she went rigid. Every single hair on her back stood straight up. I stepped out to look, and that's when I heard it. A dry sound, not from one direction, from everywhere, like thousands of voices speaking just below the range of hearing, growing, getting closer. The trees weren't moving. There was no wind. Nothing was moving at all. But the sound was getting louder, and then I smelled it. Sulfur. That sharp, rotten egg chemical smell that hits the back of your throat. My stomach turned. Biscuit wasn't barking. She was growling. Low. Slow. That deep animal sound you never want to hear from a dog you love. And then she lunged. She launched herself into the darkness, snarling, biting at nothing, at empty air. I grabbed her collar and yanked her back inside and slammed the door shut. Something hit the door from the other side. Hard. The whole frame shook. Then again, and again. The pounding continued for hours. Neither of us moved. Biscuit stayed pressed against my legs until the sun finally came up, and I just sat there, telling myself there was a rational explanation, while knowing somewhere deep down that there wasn't. But even that night, that wasn't the worst of it. A few weeks later, I came home from football practice, dropped my bag by the door, and looked into our reading room. There was a figure sitting in the rocking chair. It looked almost human. Long hair hanging over its face. But the rest of it wasn't right. Its body was completely black, not dark, not shadowed, black, like someone had cut a hole in the room itself, like light couldn't touch it, like it was pulling the illumination out of the air around it. It was reading. Head down, still. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it raised its head. I don't have a word for what I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear. Fear you can reason through. This was something older, something that shut everything down. I stumbled backward and hit the wall, and then it moved. One moment it was in the chair. The next, it was a smear across the wall, like spilled ink streaking toward the window. There, and gone in half a second, through the glass, gone. The rocking chair kept moving long after it left. Biscuit ran in from the hallway and started barking at the exact path it had taken, over and over, as if she could still see it standing there. That was the moment I understood. It wasn't the house. It was the land, the graves, the river, all of it connected. All of it wrong, in some way I didn't have a word for. And then there was one final night, the night I still can't explain. I went to bed at 11. Nothing unusual. I was exhausted, fell asleep fast. I woke up, and the sky above me was full of stars. I wasn't in my room. I wasn't in the house at all. I was lying on the hillside, on the cold ground, beside the 4 graves. The stone markers were right next to me, in the dark. I was soaked in sweat. My feet were bare. I had no memory of getting up, no memory of walking outside, no memory of anything after closing my eyes. I ran back inside. I locked every door. I didn't tell my parents. I never went near those graves again. To this day I don't know what was buried on that hillside. I don't know what was in that rocking chair. I don't know what pounded on our walls every night, or what my dog was growling at in the dark, or what found me sleeping on that hill beside those stones. What I do know is this. Before we found those graves, nothing strange ever happened on that property. and after we disturbed them, something noticed us. For the next 4 years, it never truly left. This is the story of the valley and what was waiting for me inside it. I was going through a rough stretch of life when I found the place. Bills, setbacks, the kind of season where every door you knock on stays closed. So when an acquaintance mentioned she knew of a cheap rental out in the desert southwest, I didn't think twice. I needed a lifeline, and this felt like one. The property was about 9 miles outside of town, down a dirt road that had clearly never been maintained by anyone, ever. 5 acres of open land in a wide, stunning valley. A seasonal creek ran through the back half that turned into something close to a small lake during monsoon season. There was a wooded ridge along the back tree line and mountains beyond that, beautiful in the way that wild, untouched places sometimes are. And sitting in the middle of all that beauty was the most run-down trailer you've ever seen in your life. But I didn't care. I took the keys the same day. Before I could move in, I had to clean the place out. Weeks of bleach, scrubbing, throwing things away. What I noticed while cleaning was strange, though. Tucked in the closets and corners were personal items, sentimental things, photo frames, old jewelry, things people don't leave behind unless they left in a hurry. I set some of it aside. I couldn't bring myself to dump it. Something about it just felt wrong. After the cleaning was done, I invited my friend Marcus out to celebrate with me. My neighbor came over too, with her husband and 4 kids, and that's when I noticed the first thing. Her husband was off. Not rude, not unfriendly, just off, like he was somewhere else entirely, standing right there in my kitchen. I brushed it off. I was in a good mood, and I didn't want to read into things, but then the storm rolled in. I love storms. My neighbor does not seem to have any fear of them either, normally. But she started pacing, looking out the windows, anxious in a way I couldn't explain. And then the loudest crack of thunder I have ever heard in my life hit. My entire body physically swayed with the sound. I laughed it off for the kids' sake, but my neighbor came back through the door completely in tears, holding her youngest, who was screaming, and she could barely speak. Turns out her husband and Marcus had been driving back from next door when lightning struck the ground right beside the truck. Close enough to feel it. The strange part, that drive takes 3 minutes, maybe 3.5. But from the moment that lightning hit to the moment they walked through my door was over 20 minutes. Neither of them would ever explain what happened in between. Marcus told me he loved me, but he would never go back out there again, and he never did. I should have paid attention to that. I moved in a few weeks later. The animals seemed fine. The dog explored. The cat found a sunny spot on the floor. The rabbit settled in. Everything looked okay. The first night I was there, I had the worst nightmare of my life. The entire dream took place at the property. I was terrified and couldn't find help anywhere. I remember a teenage boy curled in the corner, wearing flower-patterned swim trunks, completely unresponsive no matter what I said to him. I kept looking out the windows into total darkness, knowing something was out there. Eventually I opened the front door. On the doorstep were 2 snakes, green ones, twisted together. I screamed for someone to call the neighbor and bring a gun. He showed up with a shovel and a grin. I woke up screaming, fell back asleep, woke up screaming again. This went on all night. I told myself it was just stress, just a new place, just adjustment. 2 days later, I was out in the hammock watching the animals play when I heard a sound near my dog, and she jumped back hard. I walked over to investigate and found a rattlesnake just outside the fence line. I'd never seen one in person before, never heard one. I stood there staring at it, and then I saw the second head, 2 rattlesnakes, coiled around each other, exactly like my dream. I called the neighbor over and asked him to bring a gun. He pulled up a few minutes later, and the moment he stepped out of that truck, I froze. He had a shovel in his hand. His teenager climbed out after him, quiet and disinterested, wearing the exact shorts I had seen in my nightmare. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. He dealt with the snakes, mentioned casually that it might be dangerous for me to live out there alone without a firearm, and left. His tone made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't shake for days. After that, the nightmares got worse. Every single night, I'd wake up screaming, fall back under, wake up again, always at the property, always afraid. And a word started appearing in the dreams that I had never used in my waking life, a word I barely even knew, and it kept rising up from somewhere inside me like something trying to send a warning. The back room of the trailer became somewhere I couldn't go. In daylight it was uncomfortable. At night I couldn't get near the hallway that led to it without a feeling so deep and so physical it made me nauseous. I kept it shut, vacant. I told myself I just didn't need the space. The people around me started pulling away. Friends who came to visit once never came back. They didn't make excuses. They just said the place made them uncomfortable and left it at that. My neighbor and the other people nearby became cold, almost hostile, like they were quietly willing me to leave. I eventually called a shaman, explained everything. She listened carefully, asked where the property was located, and went quiet for a long moment. Then she told me no, she would not come, and her advice to me was to leave immediately. Don't wait, don't try to fix it, just go. I told her I wasn't ready to give up that easily. I found 2 other women who agreed to come perform a cleansing. We walked the property together. When we reached the old bonfire ring where I had burned those abandoned belongings from the closets, one of them stopped dead. She turned to me and asked what I had burned there. I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You shouldn't have done that." She left shortly after. I never heard from her again. I started waking up every night between 1 and 3 in the morning. Not from nightmares this time. Just waking, alert to nothing. Except one night, I heard a deep male voice, speaking words I couldn't make out. Another night, a woman's voice, same thing. And then one night, a voice that was clear as anything, a low male voice that said, "I'm not ready yet." I downloaded a sleep recorder to try to convince myself I was imagining things. What I captured, I still think about. A woman's voice, distinct and close, saying, "Come home." Something that sounded like distant singing. A woman's voice, sharp and sudden, saying, "Shut up." I deleted the app the day I moved out. I don't know why. I just couldn't keep it. And then I started seeing it in my peripheral vision. In the kitchen, a shape, just at the edge of my sight, never there when I turned to look directly at it. My dog growled at the windows every night. She barked into the darkness for the entire time I lived there. She was friendly to everyone who came into my life, except the neighbors, every single one of them. She never warmed to a single person on that road. I don't know what was in that valley. I don't know what I burned in that bonfire ring, or what it stirred up. I don't know what the shaman sensed when she went quiet on the phone, or why 2 different women who agreed to help me both left and never called again. I don't know whose voices were recorded in my bedroom in the middle of the night. What I know is this. I eventually left, and the moment I drove off that property for the last time, I felt it lift, like a pressure I had stopped noticing because I'd been carrying it so long. I don't live there anymore. I'm okay now, but I think about that valley more than I'd like to admit, and I think it's still out there, waiting for the next person to take the keys. June 3rd, 2017, 3:40 in the morning. I remember the exact date and time because of what happened to my body that night, and then it happened again, the very next night. Same hallway, same time. I was a paranormal tour guide for 10 years. I'd seen things that made other people run, but those 2 nights, those were the ones that changed me. My name is Morgan, and for a decade, I worked as a tour guide and ghost hunt event manager at one of the most disturbed buildings in the entire country. A massive 19th century psychiatric hospital that operated for over 100 years before it was finally shut down in 1994. The kind of place where the walls have absorbed more human suffering than most people could even begin to imagine. I'm not going to romanticize it. The history there is genuinely painful, and spending years becoming an expert on that history took something out of me that I'm still working to get back. But that's not what this is about. This is about what I saw, what I heard, what happened to my body inside those halls, and why, after 10 years of walking skeptics through the dark and watching them laugh nervously at every creak in the floor, I stopped being skeptical myself. It started on an ordinary evening during my training period. I was on the first floor with 2 co-workers while the rest of the group was upstairs on a tour. We were just quietly hanging around, killing time, not really expecting anything. Light from outside was coming through the windows and falling across the inner hallway wall in a long pale strip. And in that strip of light, I watched the perfect silhouette of a man walk through it, head to hip, clean, crisp, moving left to right like someone strolling casually down a hallway. I said something out loud. I don't even remember what. Something like, "Did you see that?" All 3 of us watched as an arm and a hand slowly moved back into the light from the right side. I ran into the room immediately, went straight to the window to look for whoever was outside, and that's when it hit me. The bottom of that window was nearly 7 feet off the ground. Whatever cast that shadow was not standing outside. I've never forgotten the shape of it, not once in all the years since. But that was just the beginning. We used to run experiments with what's called a spirit box. It rapidly scans radio frequencies, and the idea is that whatever is in the room can use that static to push words through. One person wears noise-canceling earbuds and listens to the static. When they hear a word, they say it out loud. The other person watches the room. I always loved being the listener. There's something weirdly meditative about sitting in the dark with nothing but white noise in your ears. One night, my coworker Dana and I ran one of these experiments in a room with a very specific and very dark history, a room where someone was murdered in 1987. We'd been in there about 10 minutes. I was hearing nothing but static, no words, no blips of radio signal, just that constant ch-ch-ch of white noise filling my head. I was honestly starting to get a little bored, and then I heard a woman's voice, clear as anything, one word, evil. So I said it out loud, just repeated it the way I was supposed to, evil. Next thing I know, Dana is shining her flashlight directly into my face. I pulled the earbud out, and she was practically frantic. "It's time to go," she said, "time to go, right now." We moved fast, down the hall, around the corner, all the way to the center section of the building, before she would even tell me what she'd heard. While I was sitting there listening to static, she said she kept hearing the sound of someone shuffling their feet just outside the door, moving back and forth. She'd spoken up and asked, out loud, whether whoever was in the hallway was nice. That was the exact moment I said the word evil. She never came back to that room again. Now, I want to tell you about the thermal imaging, because this one I think about a lot. A group of visitors came in one night with a professional thermal imaging camera. We set it up at one end of the ward, pointed straight down the hall, so we could all watch the feed on a tablet in real time. One of the guys walked down the hall to place a sensor device at the far end. On the thermal screen, we could see him perfectly. A bright human-shaped form, warm colors, exactly what you'd expect. As he passed one of the doorways, about a quarter of the way down the hall, something leaned out. A head, a neck, shoulders, the upper body of a figure in cool colors, not warm, not human temperature, cool, like it had been standing in that room for a very long time. It leaned out from the doorway as he walked past, just for a second, like it was checking him out, and then it pulled back. None of us said anything for a moment. I would give almost anything to have a copy of that footage, but the 2 nights I keep coming back to, the 2 nights that genuinely changed something in me, were June 3rd and June 4th of 2017, both at 3:40 in the morning, same hallway, same part of the building. June 3rd. We'd already been in there for over an hour. There had been sounds, a woman's voice picking up on the devices, footsteps on the hardwood. At one point, what sounded like someone running toward us down the hall. I was sitting on the floor with a group, trying to stay calm, trying to stay present, doing the job. And then I started feeling dizzy. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. I'd been doing this long enough to know how the mind can play tricks in the dark, but then came the burning. A sharp, intense heat on my lower back, just to the right of my spine. I told myself that too was nothing. I didn't want to be that person who makes a scene in front of guests, so I sat with it, and sat with it, and sat with it while it got worse and worse and worse, until I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I asked my coworker to check my back. She went completely still. There was a mark, 3 to 4 inches long, about an inch wide, red and raised, like a burn or a deep abrasion, right where I'd been feeling the heat. Nothing had touched me. I hadn't leaned against anything. There was nothing there that could have caused it. Most marks people claim to get in places like that are gone within an hour. Mine lasted almost a week, and to this day, the nerves in that spot feel strange, sometimes cold, sometimes like a deep skin soreness that comes out of nowhere. Especially when I think about that night. I still don't have an explanation for it, but June 4th was worse. Same hallway, same time, 3:40 in the morning. I was holding my voice recorder in my right hand, flashlight in my left, not thinking about anything except checking the device's memory. Then the burning started again, this time on the underside of my right forearm. I shifted the flashlight down to look. The person standing next to me looked too, and we both watched as 3 welts rose on my skin, slowly, deliberately, one after another, right in front of our eyes. There was nothing there, no insect, no surface, no contact of any kind, just 3 raised lines appearing on my arm, like something was writing them. Those marks faded in about 15 minutes. No lasting physical effects, but what they left behind wasn't physical. I took a week off after that, and when I came back to that hallway for the rest of that summer, I was never fully comfortable again. Something had shifted, something in the way I understood the world, and what might exist just outside the edges of it. I worked that job for 10 years total. I resigned in 2021, burnout officially, but honestly, it was more than that. Years of walking through genuine darkness, studying real human suffering, and then going home and trying to feel normal. It adds up in ways you don't notice until it's almost too late. Since I left, my mental health has improved more than I can put into words. I used to tell people it felt like getting out of a toxic relationship, a place I loved and feared in equal measure, a place that gave me the most extraordinary experiences of my life and took something quiet from me in return. I still don't know what was in that hallway on those 2 nights. I'm not sure knowing would help. Some things in that building don't want to be understood. They just want to be felt. And trust me, once you've felt it, you don't forget. There are things that happen in this life that you cannot explain away. You try. You really do. You run through every logical possibility, every rational excuse, every coincidence you can think of, and then you run out of options. And you're left sitting there in the quiet, holding the evidence in your hand, knowing that something just reached across whatever line separates this world from wherever they went and touched you. This is one of those stories, and I know how it sounds, I do, but stay with me. My name is Danny. I'm a dad, a husband, a pretty regular guy. I'm not someone who talks about this kind of thing openly, but something happened last week that I can't keep to myself anymore, because the more I sit with it, the more certain I am that what occurred in my house was not a coincidence. It started the night my wife and I came home from a wedding. We'd been gone overnight. First real night away together in probably 2 years. We had a sitter watching the kids. Everything went smooth. And when we pulled into the driveway the next morning, the house was calm. The kids were fine. and nothing seemed out of place. Nothing, except the TV remote was gone. Now I know what you're thinking. A missing remote. That's your big supernatural story? Just hang with me, because this remote matters more than you think. I looked everywhere. Under the couch cushions, behind the TV stand, in the kids' rooms, under the coffee table, in the couch itself. Nothing. I checked that one spot under the left side of the couch where remotes always end up, at least once every single day. I know that sounds obsessive, but if you've got kids, you know. That remote was just gone, completely and totally gone. After about a week of searching, I gave up and ordered 2 replacement remotes off eBay. Problem solved, right? Move on, let it go. That's what a rational person does. Except something kept bothering me about it. Something I couldn't name. Now I need to tell you about my brother. His name was Jeff. And if you've ever had a brother, a real one, the kind who drives you absolutely crazy in the best possible way, then you already know what I'm about to describe. Jeff was a prankster, not the malicious kind. The kind who would hide your stuff, wait patiently, watch you search every single corner of the house, and then the moment you finally gave up and walked away, he'd put it back exactly where it was supposed to be, like it had been there the whole time, like you were losing your mind. He thought that was the funniest thing in the world, and it drove me crazy every single time. He'd do it to me. He'd do it to our sister Linda. He'd do it to anyone who was paying enough attention that it would actually get to them. Jeff passed away in 2011, and I want you to understand something. When you lose someone like that, someone who was just fully, completely alive, in a way that some people never manage to be, the silence they leave behind is a specific kind of silence. It has a shape. You feel it in weird moments. You go to text them something funny, and then remember. You hear a song they loved and have to pull over. You catch yourself thinking, Jeff would have had something to say about this. Jeff would have absolutely roasted me for this. And then you remember that you don't get that anymore. 13 years, that's how long he'd been gone. And in all that time, I dreamed about him maybe twice. So last night, I want you to picture this. My son came out of his room around 10, couldn't sleep, asked if he could go curl up with his mum. I told him of course, and since I didn't want to wake my wife by coming to bed late, I just set myself up on the couch, grabbed a blanket, turned off the lights, let the house go quiet, and somewhere in the middle of the night, Jeff showed up. In the dream, he looked exactly like himself. Not sick, not sad, not the way people sometimes look in grief dreams, where something is slightly off about them. He looked like Jeff, that same expression he always had, like he was about to say something that was going to make you groan. And in his hand, he was holding my remote, the missing remote, the one I had been looking for every single day for over a week. He looked at me, and he said he was sorry for making me spend the money on the replacements, because he knew me. He knew I hate wasting money on something I shouldn't have needed to buy. That was such a Jeff thing to say. And then he told me, he said he'd put it back where it usually is. And then I woke up. It was early morning. The house was still quiet. I lay there for a second, just sitting with the feeling of it. That specific bittersweet weight you carry after a dream like that, where someone you love shows up and it feels so real that waking up almost hurts. But then I thought about what he said. I got up off that couch, walked over to it, reached down into that exact spot, the spot I had checked no less than once a day for a week, and my hand closed around the remote. It was there. I stood in my living room in the early morning light, holding that remote, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, or both at the same time. I just stood there, because I had checked that spot. My wife had checked that spot. Between the two of us, we had put our hands down into that couch probably 20 times or more. It was not there, and then it was. I went and woke my wife up. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I told her about the dream, and I held up the remote, and she just started crying. Not because she was scared, because she understood immediately what had happened, because she knew Jeff too. She knew exactly what this was. And then I called my sister Linda. When I told her the story, she didn't pause. She didn't say that's weird, or are you sure, or maybe you just missed it. She went quiet for a second, and then she said, "That is so classic Jeff," because she remembered exactly what I remembered. She remembered every time he'd hidden her things, waited until she was completely frustrated and ready to give up, and then put everything back in the most obvious spot possible, right when she stopped looking. That was his signature move. That was entirely, completely, 100% him. I keep turning it over in my head. The timing of it, the fact that the dream came the night I happened to be sleeping on the couch in that room, right next to where the remote had been missing from. The fact that he apologized for the money. The fact that he was specific about where he'd put it back. Jeff was always specific when he was messing with you. That was what made it so aggravating and so funny at the same time. He didn't do things halfway. Why did the sitter have anything to do with it? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe the fact that we were gone and someone new was in the house shifted something. Maybe it was just the first opening he'd had in a while. I don't have an answer for that. What I do know is that 2 replacement remotes are on their way to my house right now, and the moment they arrive, I'm sending them straight back. Jeff, I don't know if you can hear this, but you got me. Again. After 13 years, across whatever impossible distance there is between here and wherever you are, you got me. And it was very, very funny. It was also the greatest gift I've gotten in a long time. I don't know what happens after this life. I don't know if the people we love stick around in some form, or check in on us, or find small ridiculous ways to remind us that they haven't completely disappeared. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a philosopher. I'm just a guy who found a remote this morning in a spot he checked 20 times. But I'll tell you this, I used to wonder sometimes if Jeff knew how much he was missed. If wherever he is, he has any idea of the size of the hole he left behind. And now, for the first time in 13 years, I don't have to wonder about that anymore, because I think he knows. I think he's always known. And I think he's still very much himself. My son came home from the hospital weighing 5 pounds. He was on oxygen. He was on medication to remind his body to breathe. And from the very first night, something else came home with him. Something that watched over him when I couldn't. Something that woke me up the night I needed to be woken up most. I don't know who she was, but I think she's the reason my son is alive today. This happened over 20 years ago, and I still think about it almost every single day. My son Connor was born early, 32 weeks. For anyone who hasn't experienced a premature birth, I'll tell you this, those first weeks are the kind of fear that rewires you permanently. You hold your breath every time someone else exhales. You check the monitor before you check anything else. You sleep with one ear always open, even when you're completely unconscious. Connor spent his first month in the NICU, and when he finally came home, we weren't out of the woods yet. He was still on supplemental oxygen, still on caffeine, which premature babies are given to stimulate their nervous system and prevent episodes where they simply forget to breathe. 5 pounds, tiny and perfect, and fragile in a way that made my chest ache just looking at him. And from the very first night we brought him home, things started happening that I couldn't explain. The first thing I noticed was the cat. We had an orange tabby named Pepper, who had spent the entire pregnancy treating Connor's nursery like his personal territory. I'd go in there to set up the crib, the dresser, the little lamp, and Pepper would already be curled up in the corner like he owned the place. But the night Connor came home, Pepper walked to the doorway of that room, stopped dead, and never went in again. Not once, not in all the weeks that followed. Our dog, a big golden mix named Duke, started doing something strange around the same time. He'd sit at the bottom of the stairs every evening and just tilt his head, like he was listening, like there was a conversation happening somewhere above him that only he could faintly hear. I'd stand there watching him and feel the hair on my arms rise, and then I'd tell myself, I was just exhausted. New mother exhaustion, that's all it was. But then there was the toy. A friend had gifted Connor a peekaboo big bird, the kind that says peekaboo when you cover and uncover its eyes. Cute enough in daylight, deeply unsettling at 2 in the morning when it goes off by itself in a quiet house. And it did, regularly. I moved it to the closet, thinking maybe something was triggering the sensor. I put it in a box. I closed the box. I closed the closet door. It still went off. I started feeling it around this time too. That feeling of not being alone. I'd be changing Connor's diaper, talking softly the way you do, and I'd sense someone in the doorway. I'd start a sentence directed at whoever just walked in, and then I'd turn around, and the room would be completely empty, every time. And then the dream started. Every few nights, I'd dream about a woman in Connor's room. I never saw her face. I never saw her clearly at all. Just a shadow, tall, with long dark hair, standing at the edge of the crib and reaching in, slowly, gently, like she was checking on him, like she belonged there. Here's the part that still gets me. Those dreams never frightened me, not even a little. They felt calm, almost like a reassurance. Like someone was saying, don't worry, I've got him. I'd wake up from them and feel more rested than I had any right to feel. I didn't understand it then. I think I'm starting to understand it now. Connor had been home for about a month when it happened. Our bedroom was just down the hall from his nursery. I slept on the right side of the bed, closest to the door. My husband Daniel slept on the left. That arrangement mattered because of what happened next. I was in a deep sleep, the kind of sleep that takes everything out of you just to get there. And then something grabbed my shoulder and shook me. Not gently, not the way you nudge someone awake, hard, urgent, the way you shake someone when something is wrong. I sat up gasping and turned to Daniel, and he was on the far side of the bed, sound asleep, facing the other direction. He hadn't moved. He couldn't have reached me. Physically, the geometry didn't work. I didn't stop to think about it. I was already moving. I ran down the hall and shoved open Connor's door and flipped the light on. And I heard it, a gasp, small and sharp, like a tiny body startling itself back into motion. I stood there in the doorway with my heart in my throat, and I understood in that moment what I was looking at. Connor had stopped breathing, and the sudden flood of light into his dark room had startled him, and that startle had made him breathe again. That's actually how it works with premature babies. Sometimes all they need is a jolt, a surprise, something to remind the body what it's supposed to be doing. If I had slept through that night, I don't let myself finish that thought. After that night, things slowly returned to normal. Connor continued to improve, and as he got stronger, as the oxygen came off and the caffeine was gradually reduced, the strange things faded with it. Duke stopped sitting at the bottom of the stairs and listening. Pepper walked back into the nursery one afternoon, like nothing had ever happened. The big bird toy never went off on its own again. The feeling of another presence in the house quietly lifted, like she knew her job was done. I've thought about her a lot over the years. The woman in the dreams, the shadow with the long dark hair standing over my son's crib. I'm not sure I'll ever know who she was, or where she came from, or why she chose us. But the feeling I always got from those dreams was warmth, protection, something ancient and gentle, watching over something small and new. I believe she came home with Connor from the hospital. I believe she stayed until he was strong enough not to need her anymore. And I believe that on the one night it truly mattered. She reached across whatever distance exists between her world and mine, and she shook me awake. I don't have a scientific explanation for any of this, but I have a son who is in his 20s now, healthy and whole, and completely unaware of how close that one night came to going differently. And somewhere, I hope she knows. I hope she knows I never stopped being grateful. There was something in the back seat. Neither of us looked. Neither of us said a word. We just kept driving. And to this day, my dad and I have never been able to explain what we both felt on that road. This is the story I've never told anyone outside my own family. I was 15 years old when this happened, sometime around 2012. I was visiting a friend's place, had been there most of the day, and my dad swung by to pick me up right around the time the sun went down. My mom was back home waiting on us so we could all sit down for dinner together. Normal evening, nothing unusual, the kind of night you forget by the time you wake up the next morning. Except I never forgot this one. The drive home wasn't long, maybe 15 minutes, but the road we took was the kind of road that sticks in your memory even when nothing happens on it. Long, winding, completely dark, trees pressing in on both sides, so thick you couldn't see 5 feet past the tree line. No street lights, no other cars, no signs of anything living out there beyond the occasional shadow shifting between the trunks. We lived on a military base nearby, and my dad liked using the back entrance because it cut the drive in half. That road ran straight through a national forest, beautiful in daylight, something else entirely after dark. We pulled away from my friend's house and started talking. School, my sister, whatever my mum might have cooking. The kind of easy conversation that doesn't require any real thought, where you're just filling the space between where you are and where you're going. The van hummed along the dark road, and I watched the trees blur past my window, and everything felt completely ordinary. And then, slowly, it didn't. I couldn't tell you the exact moment the conversation stopped. It just kind of faded out, the way a radio signal does when you drive too far from the tower. 1 second we were talking, and then we weren't, and neither of us moved to start it back up. I remember sitting there in the passenger seat and noticing, for the first time, how quiet it was. And then I noticed something else. I was cold, not the car cold. The heat was running. I could feel it on my legs. But there was this other cold, the kind that doesn't come from the air, the kind that starts somewhere at the base of your skull and spreads downward slowly. And with it came a feeling I still don't have a clean word for. The only way I can describe it is this. It felt like being watched, not from outside the car, from inside it. I didn't turn around. Something in me said, don't look, don't acknowledge it, don't give it a reason to move. I know how that sounds. I was 15, driving down a dark road, probably letting my imagination run wild. That's what I told myself. Except the feeling didn't fade. It got heavier, more specific, like whatever I was sensing wasn't in the whole car. It was in the very back row, just sitting there, in the dark behind us. I kept my eyes forward. I watched the road. I watched my dad out of the corner of my eye, and he looked completely focused, jaw set, both hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead. I figured he was just concentrating on the curves in the road. I figured he wasn't thinking about anything unusual at all. I was wrong. 2 of the longest minutes of my life passed before I finally saw the lights of the base gate up ahead, that pale, harsh glow cutting through the dark like a wall. The moment we rolled into the light, whatever I'd been feeling just lifted, gone, like a pressure releasing. We checked in at the gate, pulled through, drove to our house, and my dad parked in the driveway and turned off the engine. And then neither of us got out of the car. We just sat there, quiet, engine ticking as it cooled. Porch light on ahead of us, and I thought, okay, maybe he's just tired, maybe he's just slow tonight, give it a second. But a few seconds passed, and he still didn't move, and that's when I turned to look at him. He was already looking at me, with this expression I'd never seen on my dad's face before. Not scared exactly, something more like careful, like he was trying to figure out how to say something without it sounding strange. He shook his head slightly, gestured toward the back of the van, and then he said it. When we were driving, did you feel something weird, like someone was back there? I got instant chills from my scalp to my feet. Yes, I told him yes. I told him I'd felt it the whole time and hadn't said a word because I didn't want to say it out loud while we were still on that road. He laughed. That short, quiet laugh people do when they're more unsettled than they're letting on. He said he hadn't looked in the rearview mirror once, said he made a conscious decision not to, just kept his eyes on the road and his hands on the wheel and did not look back. We had both felt the exact same thing at the exact same time, in the same car, and neither of us had said a single word about it until we were safely in the driveway with the engine off and every light in the house burning ahead of us. I called my dad years later and asked if he remembered that drive. He said he remembered it clearly. He said he thinks it was some kind of energy passing through, not threatening, not malicious, just something that existed outside of what either of us could understand, moving through that forest road the same way we were, and for a few minutes our paths crossed. Maybe he's right, but I'll tell you this, I've driven a lot of dark roads in my life since then, and every time I'm on one at night, with the trees closed on both sides and no other cars anywhere in sight, I keep my eyes forward. I don't look in the back seat, and I don't say a word about it until I'm somewhere with the lights on. There are things you see on surveillance footage that you can never explain away. Things that shouldn't be possible, but are right there on camera. Time-stamped, undeniable, and this is one of those things. I've worked in digital surveillance for years. My company monitors the security feeds for thousands of restaurants, bars and gas stations all across the country. Most of what we do is routine, employee theft, customer disputes, the occasional break-in. You watch enough footage, you start to feel like nothing can surprise you anymore. I was wrong about that. The call came in from a fast food location in the heart of Detroit. One of their employees had suffered a medical emergency behind the building, and nobody had found him for days. They needed us to pull the footage and figure out what happened. Standard investigation. Or so I thought. Here's the layout of the area, because it matters. Behind the restaurant, there was a dumpster enclosure, surrounded by a low brick wall. 2 ways in. First, a large set of swinging gates on the far side, used by the garbage trucks when they came to empty the dumpster. Those gates were always left open, always. Second, a smaller gate directly behind the back door of the restaurant. That gate was locked from the inside, and according to every employee on staff, nobody ever used it. Nobody even had a key for it anymore. That's what they told us. So I pulled the footage and started going through it. The employee, I'll call him Marcus, went out the back door late one night carrying a trash bag. Routine, nothing unusual. Because the smaller gate was locked, you could only barely see him through the gaps in the metal, but the camera angle let you see just over the top of the wall. He made it back to the dumpster area, and then he collapsed. He went down hard and didn't get up, and just like that, he was gone, hidden from view behind the dumpster, invisible to anyone walking in or out of that back door. What happened next is the part I still think about. It rained for 2 straight days, hard, the kind of cold, relentless rain that keeps your head down and your eyes on the ground, and for 2.5 days, employees came and went through that back door, trash bags in hand. Nobody looked toward that locked gate. Nobody noticed anything. He was right there, and nobody found him. 2.5 days, then came the morning of day 3. The rain had stopped overnight. The footage shows a calm, clear morning, sunlight hitting the pavement, nothing moving, nobody in the frame at all. The restaurant hadn't even opened yet. And then, the small gate, the one that was always locked, began to move, slowly, on its own. No wind, no person, no shadow, nothing touching it. It just swung open, wide open, and there was Marcus, in the exact same position he'd been in 2.5 days earlier. I watched that clip probably 15 times in a row. I checked for wind interference. I checked for any person or object off frame that could have reached it. I looked for anything at all that could explain what I was seeing. There was nothing, not one thing. A locked gate that nobody had a key for swung open on a clear, still morning, as if something decided it was time for him to be found. A couple hours later, an employee walked out with a trash bag, saw him, and called the police. Now here's what got me. Part of my job that day was to write up a formal incident report on everything the footage showed, the timeline, the gate positions, the employee movements, all of it. And I had to sit there and type out in an official document that a locked gate appeared to open by itself with no identifiable cause. Who do you even write that for? What does that even mean? I've been in this industry long enough to be skeptical of almost everything. I've seen footage misread, context misunderstood, cameras at weird angles that make things look strange when they aren't. I always look for the rational answer first, but I have watched that clip more times than I can count, and I have never found one. The gate opened. No one was there. The last time I saw Tony, he waved goodbye and told me to say hello to my dad. That was 15 years ago. Tony had been dead for 2 months. I grew up visiting my parents in a small town in the Midwest, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where the same faces show up at the same diners and the same church parking lots for decades. Tony was one of those faces. He was a close friend of my father's, helped him out with work sometimes, and I'd grown up around him my whole life. Quiet guy, reliable, never went anywhere without his old bicycle. That bike was practically part of him. When I was 17, I moved to a bigger city to start college. I'd come back every couple of months for long weekends, holidays, that kind of thing. Life moved fast. I was busy with classes, new friends, new routines. Home started to feel like a place you visited instead of a place you lived. After my second year away, my dad called me one evening and told me Tony was gone. Alcohol had caught up with him. He told me how it happened, at least what he'd heard. I remember feeling sad for a moment, saying the right things, and then life moved on, the way it does. About 2 months after that, I made a trip back home, around the start of November. My family had a tradition of visiting the graves of relatives that time of year, a quiet way of honoring the people we'd lost. I was looking forward to seeing my parents. I packed light, planned my route, figured I'd catch the afternoon bus. I missed it. The only option left was a late bus that wouldn't arrive until around 2 in the morning. Small town, that hour, there's nothing open, no ride shares, no cabs anywhere near the station, so I decided to walk. It was only about 6 or 7 blocks to my parents' house. Dark, but familiar. I knew every street. And then I remembered the bridge. There's this old bridge about 5 blocks from the house. People in that town have told stories about it for as long as I can remember. Some kind of spirit that appears at night near that crossing. One of those local legends that sounds ridiculous in daylight and considerably less ridiculous at 2 in the morning when you're alone and the street is completely silent. I'll be honest, I was a little scared. I kept my head down and walked fast, thinking about the stories, telling myself it was nothing, just an old bridge, just a quiet street, just the dark. That's when I heard the wheels, the familiar creak of an old bicycle rolling up behind me, and then a voice. "Hey, you just getting back from school?" I turned around. It was Tony. He looked exactly the way I remembered him. Same jacket, same relaxed posture, same easy smile. He was riding his bike slowly alongside me, the way he always used to when he'd run into us around town, completely normal, completely calm. And here's the thing, I didn't think anything of it. I was so caught up in that bridge, so focused on getting past it, that my brain just accepted him. Like, of course Tony's here, Tony's always around. We fell into conversation without missing a beat. School was going well. The food in the city was different, but I was getting used to it. He asked about my classes. I told him. We talked and walked together for 4 or 5 minutes, just like we had 100 times before. 1 block from my parents' house, he slowed his bike and pointed down a side street. "I gotta go check on something over that way," he said. "But you're almost home. Stay safe out there, and tell your dad I said hello." We said goodbye. I watched him turn down that street and disappear into the dark. Then I walked the last block home, went straight to my room, and went to sleep. The next morning, I came out to have breakfast with my parents. My dad was already at the table, and I was just about to open my mouth and say hey. I ran into Tony last night on the way home when it hit me. I stood there in the kitchen doorway and felt the air go out of the room. Tony was dead, had been dead for 2 months. My dad had called me and told me. I remembered the conversation word for word. I remembered saying I was sorry. I didn't say anything. I sat down. I tried to make sense of what had happened the night before, running it back through my head. The bike, the voice, the conversation, the way he'd said stay safe like he meant it. Later that afternoon, my dad brought it up himself. He told me he'd been up late and happened to look out the window when I was walking up the street. He said something seemed off about me. He said, and I remember this exactly. He said, "Were you drunk or something last night? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were walking down the street talking to nobody." I told him everything. He didn't say much for a while. Neither did we. To this day, I don't have a clean explanation for what happened on that bridge. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the fear got to me, and my mind filled in a familiar face. Maybe it was just a stranger who looked like him in the dark. But the conversation was real. The details were real. And when Tony told me to tell my dad hello, he said it the exact same way he always did. Like he meant it. Like some part of him just wanted to make sure I got home safe. And honestly, I think he did.